called standard operating procedures. All right. Okay. So, and overall, the three main reasons, that was kind of the history of why colleges started bringing it in, right? But performance enhancement, injury prevention, and health improvement, which is all things that you guys talked about. All right. What is resistance training?
Training against resistance, right?
More specifically.
Training muscle. I don't know how to make this closest.
Describe it to me.
Using resistance, using progressively overloading resistance to create muscle micro tears.
So I would say adding tension to the muscles.
Both kind of true. So I'm going to give you kind of a broad description that ties it all together. So, form of physical conditioning, right, involves external resistance. So that's to clarify. It's something outside of yourself, right? Something external, such as a weight, a resistance band, to induce muscular contractions, not necessarily tears. That might be something that happens, but it's a crucial component of strength and conditioning programs that leads to both muscle hypertrophy, so growth, and strength. Yeah, so that kind of clarify what resistance training is, right? Now we do more types of training. So let me just go through, cardiovascular endurance, right? So we have aerobic exercise. So can everyone give me some examples of aerobic exercise?
Biking.
What did you say?
Biking.
Oh, yes. Any others?
Stairmaster.
Stairmaster?
Boxing.
Boxing? Okay.
Running.
What was that?
Running.
Running? What are the benefits?
Cardiovascular endurance.
Okay. What else?
Calorie burn.
Okay.
It's more immediate.
So weight management. What else?
I'm sure there's a bunch of hormonal stuff.
So heart and lung function, probably the biggest one. And reduce risk of chronic diseases. So it's huge. I mean, that's like, yeah, it's a number one reasons I would say is, cardiovascular disease is, huge, rampant in this country. So that's like, yeah, always keep that stuff at the forefront, because when you're talking to people, you may just think of them as a normal person. But when I'm talking to someone about fitness, I think about them as like a profile. Like I think about them as like, what's going on with this person? How are they feeling when they wake up? What does their doctor say to them? Right? Because if I know those things, I now understand what they need. Right? Like I understand how to help them. If you just think of them as like, oh, that's my cousin, or oh, that's my friend, or oh, that's this, how are you going to help them if they're suffering? Right? Sometimes you got to take a step back and you got to look at people objectively, not with your emotions, but like, who is this person if I didn't know them? Right? Because then you can actually be honest with them in a whole different way. You can be like, okay, so, because like sometimes it's like, because I have family members where, they're like, my grandma who's just, has struggled with health issues, and it's like, I've offered to train her probably a dozen times over the years, never took me up on it once. But she can barely walk, she's, diabetes, like all this stuff, right? So doesn't always work, but especially with close family members. But I will say that anyone that is not a close family member, it's proven to be very effective when it comes to being able to communicate with them. So yeah, anaerobic exercises. Can anyone describe what that is? Does anyone know what that is?
Is that where there's weights included in the cardio?
Not necessarily, but it could be. So that's correct, but that's not like everything. That's one aspect. Like that anaerobic training could be doing weights with cardio. It could be.
Honestly, I don't remember the term.
Okay, so anaerobic is the opposite of aerobic, right? So high intensity, short duration activities that relies primarily on the body's anaerobic energy systems like muscle glycogen and creatine phosphate. So there's lots of examples of anaerobic. Lifting weights is anaerobic. Does that clarify it? Sprinting, ironically, is anaerobic. Running, jogging is aerobic. So ask yourself this: what makes people buff? It's kind of a good way I like to think about it. Because look at a sprinter and then look at a cross country runner. String bean, jacked as hell. Like, well, why is the sprinter all jacked? Anaerobic, right? Bodybuilder, powerlifter, right? Like they tend to be more muscular. So that's kind of an easier way to think about it in terms of envisioning it. High intensity interval training. So think of short bursts also, under 30 seconds, right? Once it gets over that point, it's like the heart and the lungs that's doing most of the work versus the muscles, right? Benefits of anaerobic training.
Muscle hypertrophy.
Yes.
Overall strength, joint strength.
Better sleep.
Bone density. Enhanced athletic performance. Than any sport that involves explosive movement. Right? So something that is really good to think about and understand is like the difference in types of sports, right? Because you come up with this, like you'll see this one person who's like a track athlete or a marathon runner. That person is going to be doing heavily aerobic training. So different mentally, physically, everything, and emotionally than, let's say, like a football player or a boxer, right, or a wrestler, right? Like there's very different styles of sport in training. So understanding why they're different is helpful, because then, like for example, I can see someone and can be like, oh, that person does a long distance sport. I can just tell just by looking at them, or sometimes just by having a conversation with them, I can tell.
Right.
People who are very cerebral typically lend themselves to long distance aerobic sports. Cross country, rowing, cycling, swimming. They tend to be the people who are more academic, more intellectual, right? Whereas the people who do things like football, basketball, boxing, they tend to be more instinctual, more primal, more aggressive. It's different parts of the brain. So you find out really quick when you have a conversation with somebody, typically what type of sports or things that they might have done in the past. Or what you might want to point them towards in the future. A lot of times if I have a client, they'll be like, oh, what do you think I should get into? And I'll be like, well, based on what I know about you, I think you do well over here, right? One of my longtime client's sons, Maxwell, told me to get him into rowing. The kid is a habit machine. He had this thing where, when he started to learn how to take showers on his own and everything, kid would not take a shower. Wouldn't matter what time it was, wouldn't matter when they got home, like the kid would freak, like just couldn't handle it. That kid's a routine and habit machine. Those people, you point them into one direction, right? Now, while he does weightlift, it's not his strength. Like he weightlifts to support his rowing, sport that he does. So everyone's got, but if you take someone who, on the other hand, is like a little more like kind of all over the place, ADHD, like, has a hard time focusing, put them on something that requires intensity and they thrive. Something that requires a lot of like, aggressive, like short bursts, they'll do really well, right? So helpful to know and understand. All right. Different types of flexibility and mobility. All right. So what are the different types of, let's just say, stretching?
Static, dynamic, active, right? That's like an external force on it.
Yeah, I mean, the main ones, honestly, that most people will talk about is static and dynamic, right? Maybe can anyone give me an example of each?
Static stretching was, yeah.
Holding it.
Yeah, the dynamic stretching is, like a Frankenstein or something like that.
Like a what?
Like Frankenstein's,
Yep.
like water.
So all it is dynamic means you're moving while you're doing it, right? Typically, static stretching, you want to hold to the end of a workout, right? Now, dynamic stretching, what's the difference between warm up and dynamic stretching? I guess is an interesting kind of topic. So, what would you consider a warm up versus what would you consider a dynamic stretch?
I think it's a blurred line, but I would assume this a dynamic stretch is more so focused on like warming up the muscle itself and like bringing blood flow and activation towards it, whereas a warm up is like you warming up for one specific movement by doing a similar movement pattern.
Well, interestingly, because you said dynamic stretch, a dynamic stretch would not involve getting the muscle contractions, really.
Oh yeah, sure.
And so you kind of blurred them a little bit, that's exactly. I think the main difference is a warm up is designed to get you ready for a specific sport, movement, something specific. Whereas a dynamic stretch, I think, is more, I guess, just general. It has to do more about stretching the muscle versus getting warm. Yeah, I mean, that's the best thing I could come up with. Okay, so different types of mobility. Any ideas? Mobility training. Are you doing any mobility training?
Burpees.
Probably not mobility training. Are you doing anything?
Mobility training? Would that be like riding a bike or?
No, so mobility would be like
But like the rotator cuff and like inner neck work.
range of motion mostly.
Okay.
So let's just say you go like this and you can only go like this, right? But you're like, uh-oh, I can't even do an overhead press. So how do you get more range of motion in the joint?
Stretching?
Slightly different. So stretching is like, let me give you an example. So stretching is like kind of like what you did with here, right? This is a stretch, okay? But let's just say that that's not giving you the mobility that you want. Stretching is like stretching that individual muscle.
Yeah.
Mobility, on the other hand, could be a couple things. It can be a stretch. I mean, technically, a stretch could be a mobility exercise, but a mobility exercise isn't necessarily a stretch.
Would yoga be mobility?
It could be, yes, it could be. Now, I think people most associate mobility exercises with like foam rolling, using a lacrosse ball or something to get that muscle to break up so that you can have more range of motion. So I think a lot of times people will attribute it to that, but ultimately it's to create greater range of motion. So like, for example, if you're having trouble squatting and your heels are coming up every time you squat because you have tight ankles or something, right? Then, sitting in this position could be considered, mobility work, right? Or taking a ball or taking your fingers and digging into your, Achilles, that can be considered mobility work. It's important to know what the proper biomechanics are so that you know if you need mobility work, right? So understanding, and that'll probably be in another lesson, but like, let's just say, for example, you have a person, I'm gonna draw stick figures, it's gonna be really ugly, but let's just say you have a person, right, and you're trying to figure out if their squat form is good, right? Bar right here. You wanna know what this should look like theoretically, right? There's shoes. But now let's say they are here and they're here. Now it's like, so and I'm sure one of the lessons we'll have a bunch of this where we look at like different faults and different things that, if you see this form, like if you see their lower back rounding in their lumbar region right here, that's a sign that you need to do something, right? And sometimes it's just a matter of teaching them, and sometimes it's not. So sometimes you have to just say, hey, let's try to bring your shoulders back. You'll give them certain cues, but sometimes it doesn't matter what you do, their body is inhibiting them from getting into that correct position. And if that's the case, then you'll have to do some mobility work, some stretching, whatever. And yes, yoga poses is another, common form of stretching mobility. All right, let's go over neuromuscular coordination. So, does anyone know what that is?
How your brain controls the muscles.
Yeah, pretty much. So, you're ultimately your brain controls your body. So, how would you train that?
Mindset.
That's a little different, because that would be more in like maybe what levels you can get to, but in terms of how do you train it, would be more just general.
Breathing techniques.
Huh?
Breathing techniques.
No, we're talking about your brain controlling your body. How do you teach your brain to control your body?
It depends.
What type of exercises you could do?
For one, if it's like just building a better connection than like doing a certain exercise where you can just really pinpoint on the muscle and like have them look in the mirror, that's something. Or like if you want to train just your nervous system for being capable of handling a certain weight, then like overload training, like walking.
Let's go more basic. Let's imagine these are kids that are like 5 years old. How would you teach them?
You tell me you can't throw a 5-year-old under 4 or 5?
Repetition.
Huh?
Repetition.
That's a big part of it. But like, what types of things would you do? Think back to being a kid.
Coordination.
Ladder drills,
Drills.
plyometrics, burpees. Could be cone drills. Balance and stability is a huge part of it too. So, question is, how do you teach balance, right? Well, kids are pretty good at teaching themselves this, but the irony is then we unlearn it as adults. And so most of the time when people come in here, you have to teach them how to balance, like a lot of times. And so let's just do a exercise real quick. So everyone stand up. What I want you to do is I want you to stand on one leg, and I want you to just try to balance yourself on the ball of your foot and then reach down. You see your leg shaking, Asa?
Yeah.
Joseph?
Mm-hmm.
Jojo, you feel your leg shaking?
Yes.
That right there, that is the core of training stability. So as a coach, as a trainer, if you can get your client to have that, you are training stability. So you can do that, by the way, with just about any body part, if you understand leverages. So like I've had people who they're like, oh yeah, I just can't seem to get my shoulder to move properly, or I can't seem to get my bicep to engage, right? Because there's some sort of disconnect, right? And like they'll go to do a movement and their arm will just give out, and they just don't have any stability in that arm. So you gotta ask yourself, like, how do you build that? Well, I'll do tests with multiple different movements to find where it shakes the most. So this is like practical application stuff, right? This isn't theory. This is like, if you want to find where the problem is, find where that shit goes earthquake. That's the deal. And so, it always comes from the limbs. So the reason why I had to do it with the feet, because it starts with the feet. If it's lower body up to like hips, it's gonna start with your feet.
Right.
If it's hips up, hands. So you got to just ask yourself that, right? So how I would do it with hands, there's lots of different ways. If you want to train certain things, you could test it hands overhead. You can go out here to test to see where we're at, here, right? There's lots of different ways to figure out where's the problem stemming from. You could do planks, right? Hands out. But that's all different ways where it's a really good way to diagnose where someone's weak, for lack of a better term, right? Because if they're having a problem with a movement, almost always it's because they're weak. Not like, oh, they're weak overall, they're weak somewhere. Strongest dude in the world is weak somewhere. There's a weakness because they maybe got too strong in one area and not strong enough in another. So it's just very important to be able to be good at diagnosing where is this person weak. If there was one thing I would say as a coach that in terms of training people for performance, it's the most important thing is probably that. How do you find the weakness? Person who's better at finding the weakness is going to get that person stronger. Because it's not about being the strongest in the room, it's about being the person who doesn't get injured the longest. Right. That's the best athlete. The one who can play the longest, who's playing for 20, 30 years and keeps getting better no matter how small no matter how small the progress, they're still getting better. And that person is going to beat the person who maybe gets better really quickly but then gets injured. And that's what happens to most athletes.
Right.
All right, so in terms of making good decisions as a coach, what do you think are important things to keep in your mind?
Client's interest.
Client's interest. Let's assume we all have the client's interest in mind, and then go from there.
Plateaus.
Think about like how you're making decisions with the clients, right? In terms of like, making sure that we're making smart decisions.
It's remind you, train from a holistic.
Holistic. And how do you know? Let me ask you this, you want to make decisions that are not just intuition. Intuition's half the equation, right? So you need information and you need intuition to be a great coach, right? So keeping that in mind, you got to make sure you continue to learn. If you ain't learning, people are not going to respect you as a coach. So you have to be learning, and this right here is learning, right? So I'm gonna, show you guys this, but in addition, you want to develop your own learning practices, right? I have my own. I watch YouTube videos. I, follow certain people who I respect. Do not follow charlatans and people who are full of shit. Which in the beginning, you'd be surprised, you will fall for a lot of it. Eventually, you'll get real keen on who's full of shit, and you'll just be like, okay, these people are just, looking for views. These are the real hitters. These are the real people that have real good information, right? But you, like I said, you have your own practices. Some people read studies, some people watch documentaries, whatever it is that works for you. And you want to make sure that if you're going to practice something with clients or even with yourself, have that intuition is good, but then also understand why. Most of the things that I do start off with an intuition, and then I do some research to figure out why. It's like I want to know both sides. I want to be able to explain it and break it down. Now, I don't care if it's like I don't need to, feel intellectually superior, but I need to feel like I can explain it to a child. That's my biggest thing. If you can explain it to a child, you're good. You can explain the systems and why the things happen, then you should be good.
So when you brought up the mindset of a track person versus somebody that is like a football player, let's just say I am the guy that's more geared towards football, and then I have a customer who is into track, and I have a different mindset than him, and how can I help somebody in that realm? Like maybe if that's something I don't have as much, like I don't have that mindset the same. Like, have you had someone like maybe prepping for something that you don't have as much experience in, maybe track and field? Like, what do you do in those scenarios?
You have to know about it. You don't necessarily have to be an expert in it, but you have to understand it.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So remember how I described the people who are better at kind of more aerobic, long distance exercise, right? Long distance sports. I know enough about those sports and about the minds of people who are good at that I can help them in those realms, right? It's much, much more about routine, those type of sports, than it is about intensity. It's not, if you're gonna be training for 4 hours or 6 hours, you don't really have to gear up for that mentally in the same way. that you do if you're about to fight someone for 5 minutes. Like, it's just a totally different, like your fight or flight isn't necessary for that. In fact, if you get too excited for that bike ride, you will suck. If you get super pumped up and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna crush it, and you then go ride the bike, your central nervous system's already shot. Like you already used a lot of adrenaline. You don't need that adrenaline for that bike ride. But for that fight, you're gonna need some adrenaline. You're gonna need some of that fight or flight. Right? Those are very, very different things though. So if you know enough about the sports, about what is required to be successful, you don't have to do it. You know what I'm saying? And that is all, like I'm trying to teach you guys the precursors of creating a program for somebody and be able to take them wherever it is that they want to go. Because it's not enough to just be like, oh, okay, you want to do this, this, and this, and then just writing a program. It's like, no, I step back and I'm like, okay, where do they want to go, right? What has to change mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever? Like, what has to change for them to get there, right? Then I can start building a plan. And also, based on where they're at right now, like I said, what's the biggest bang for the buck? That is where most trainers fail, I think. Or not even just fail, but just like inefficient. I think there a lot of times is big gains that get missed, right? Like a lot of people, the gain that gets missed is they don't build enough muscle right away. Not gonna be as true for kids, it's gonna be more true for adults, but they don't build enough muscle right away. And how do you build a lot of muscle? Well, first you gotta get some endurance. Because if you don't have endurance, you're not gonna be able to do all that much work. Right? So it's like you gotta think, okay, what has to happen for me to bring them to the next phase and the next phase? So it's all sequencing. What I'm trying to express to you guys, because I'm not even necessarily teaching in the traditional sense of like do this, then that, then this, and that. I'm trying to give you a mindset and a frame of thinking so that you can start sequencing these things and like understand that how to look at it, how to look at clients, how to look at someone you want to help. Because you can't just look at them and where they're at right now only. Or you can't look at just where they want to be. You got to take both of those things into consideration and then start building. Okay? All right, so what I want to do for homework, okay? So it's nothing crazy, but I want you guys to find 3 what you think are quality YouTube videos on a strength and conditioning coach. Okay. Actually, it could be strength and conditioning, it could be a personal trainer, it could be an athlete, whatever. But providing informational content that you think is good.
Can it be from the same or from one?
Different people.
Okay.
Yeah. And then find 3 that are bullshit charlatans. Okay? Because I want to make sure that we're very clear on what is good information. Because that will start a more productive journey on learning in terms of, oh, I like this athlete or I like this coach. I don't like this one because, or maybe you like their personality, but you know the information's trash. That's fine too. It's totally fine to there's plenty of personalities out there I find entertaining that I do not think they provide any value in terms of coaching. So. Makes sense. Any questions on any of that stuff?
Nope. Sounds like fun.
Awesome. And that's, it's been at least 30 minutes, right?
Yeah, it's been about 45.
Okay, cool. That's probably good for today. I could go on for hours, but we got plenty. We'll meet every week, so.
Alright.
Yep.
So this one we'll do on Mondays at 4 o'clock?
Yeah.
Got it.